Welcome to the very first episode of Poker and Podcasts. I'm Paul Christopher Hoppy, aka Zen Madman. Today we will be listening to Superhero Ethics, episode number 1, Who's My Batman? Episode number 1, part 1. Part 1 of that thing. Do I want to continue with this? I'm going to fold because I'm doing the intro. It's kind of borderline. Matthew and I recorded this back in 2016, so the audio isn't quite up to our current standards, but I don't think it's terrible either. But trust that as the series goes along, the audio will improve eventually. If you'd like to listen to the podcast without my occasional interjections, as I'm going to pause it and comment here and there, go to TheEthicalPanda.com. And if you want to watch poker without podcasts, you can go to Zen Madman Poker and subscribe there on YouTube. I have a Just Poker channel there. And if you like this, well, like it and also hit subscribe and I'll make more, lots more. All right, let's go.
I really just wanted to say, I'm Batman.
Greetings, and welcome to the first episode of the Superhero Ethics Podcast. My name is Matthew. I'm the primary author on the Superhero Ethics blog. And joining me today is Paul Christopher Hoppy, author and fellow superhero enthusiast. Paul, tell us who you
are. What's up? I'm Paul Christopher Hoppy. I play poker. I teach yoga and martial arts and write about a lot of different stuff, including poker, yoga and martial arts, fiction, and various other things.
So why Batman? What draws you to the character?
Well, I mean, he wears all black.
That
helps
cool.
with me. I'd say I'm actually going to go on a little bit of a personal history tangent.
Go for
it. When I was like 5, or 4 even, I was just a huge Superman fan. Like, I had the entire outfit, with the cape, and I, wore it to school at some, my first day of, school orientation or whatever. I had one of the village people's boyfriends was my barber and, made the little Superman curl, the hair. And my dad worked on a movie with Christopher Reeve. And
loyal readers, I just want to let you know, we're going to do everything we can to get a picture of this onto the blog. Go.
I have a picture of me as Superman as a little kid. The barber's name was Tito. And I will maybe put that on zenmadman.com at some point. But it's in my room, most of which is very messy.
Go on.
There's no photographic evidence of that I'm aware of. But yeah, and so I got to play volleyball with Superman, and he was super nice. And until I was about maybe then when I was 8, I just started wearing all black. It was just the thing, and I honestly have no idea where it came from. It was just yep, this is what I'm going to do now. But it was really when the Tim Burton Batman movie came out that I started being like, I like this, and then the next Batman movie was maybe not as good, but I was still into Batman, and then there was a little bit of a fall from grace.
There were dark times that we will not speak of. We will simply move on.
Dark times and brighter movies. But the animated series I liked, and I was never really that much of a comics reader, actually. Yeah. But, Batman was always... The thing that really appealed to me over superheroes, really, was that, he's just a guy, you know? He's just a human who sees a world that's really messed up, and he's like, I'm a billionaire, and so I'm going to do something about it because I can.
Right. He doesn't have super strength or magic eyesight or any of those other kind of God-inspired or science-given powers. To me, the thing that makes him most incredible is, in the end, the biggest thing he has going for him is his mind. And he's able to, whether it's technology or being an investigator or detective, what he's able to do is just be so damn smart to figure out what he needs to do.
Totally. And that's really where I feel like the movies have kind of let us down.
Yeah.
In that all the live action movies just have Batman as an action hero, right? Who wears a suit. And A lot of the animated stuff much more, and some of the comics. I mean, Batman debuted in Detective Comics, right? Superman was Action Comics.
Yeah.
This is historically accurate, and they call him the world's greatest detective, which is what they also call Sherlock Holmes. Like, Batman's basically Sherlock Holmes in a cape, like.
Oh,
with
absolutely.
gadgets.
I mean, some of the I like you, I did not come to this through comic books. I had my initiation in the Na TV show days, which is another sort of dark period we'll speak of a little bit.
I did watch that, actually, when I was a kid, and I really liked it.
Go on.
No, just that in a totally different way. But he was a detective.
He was. He absolutely was. And what I was going to say, though, is that because I like you, I haven't read many of the comics, but when I've read about the comics, my understanding is that they were originally very much in that, detective noir kind of setting. That the kind of like the Maltese Falcon, Dashiell Hammett kind of stuff. Like the guy, and he had, obviously, he's not a gumshoe necessarily, but he's very much in that same vein.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, he wears disguises just like Sherlock Holmes. He dodges bullets by hearing somebody pull the hammer back on a gun, so he moves before it goes off. Like, it's not a superpower, it's intelligence, and that's one thing that I think a lot of Sherlock portrayals have done really well. And Batman's basically Sherlock Holmes as a little bit more of an action hero, really, in a lot of ways.
Well, and one of the things that I noted, we mentioned that the kind of the '60s TV show. The thing that I think of that more when I think of Batman from that time, I think of the super cheesy villains and the pun-tastic dialogue. But that's, to me, the one where he always has the perfect implement on his utility belt. He has the shark repellent. He has everything he needs.
Right.
What I noticed, though, when I started watching the animated series, which I'll be honest, I didn't watch until the last year or so, but Paul, you really got me into, it seems there's much less of that. He has the batarangs, and he has the grappling hooks and the ropes and stuff like that. But it seems like that show is much less about he is so rich that he has all of these incredible toys, and really does focus more on the detective angle.
Yeah, no doubt. And then so does, I think, the Justice League series, which I find very interesting, which, it comes out of the Batman animated series, really, and then you have that same character, that same spirit of the character around a whole bunch of, like, basically gods, right? I mean, everybody else just about has tremendous superpowers or has, a magic item that gives them tremendous superpowers. And he's just a guy who's got, like, a few nifty tools on his belt, but he's really clearly the smartest out of them, and often kind of saves them by outthinking, their opponents.
Well, and what I love about that show especially, and this is obviously kind of ties into the stuff that I love to talk about on my blog, is that it seems a lot of the times he's outthinking them, but he's also helping, like, to stop the superheroes from their own natural instincts. I mean, he's often the one who says, okay, Superman has all these powers, and that's great, but what if Superman turns bad?
Right.
Or when they're first starting the Justice League, he's the one pointing out. He's almost sort of the person speaking up for everybody else on Earth, saying, wait a minute, I'm not sure if we can really trust you with all these powers and stuff like that. Yeah.
He's sort of the check and balance on their, what could be the Justice Lords, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
And, like, he's the guy who has kryptonite, just in case.
Right.
You gotta have some kryptonite lying around if Superman's on the planet, right? Like, just in case. You never know when you're gonna need it.
I mean, it's sort of an interesting question, because it makes you sort of think, where would if wormhole to make all the comic book fans happy, all of a sudden Batman winds up in the Marvel Universe, where is he on Team Tony versus Team Cap?
I'm gonna interject and say, apparently there's a comic with Batman and Daredevil in it that's a crossover, and if anybody knows how to get one's hands on that, like, to read it, maybe on the internet, I don't know, I am very, very interested, as they are maybe my top two. Probably my top two. Anyway.
Because on the one hand, I mean, he is such a rugged, and he's such a, like, you know, firm individualist. He's going to do it his way. He's not going to let anyone tell him what to do. But he also, I think he's probably going to be more on Team Cap. But he does have some of that, you know, I don't trust you all with these powers. I want someone looking out for everyone that Tony does. Yeah,
and I think he's just like, look, let me be that guy instead of the U.S. government or the UN, because I don't trust them either.
Right.
You know, because especially in Gotham, like, whatever anybody does or doesn't trust real world governments, like, Gotham is a caricature of all the worst we think of you know, what government corruption can be. And so he exists in that world, and, you know, to an extent, of course, the Marvel world is somewhat like that too.
Maybe less of a caricature and more of a fairly accurate portrayal. I don't know. Depends on how you see things. I think a lot of people maybe see things that way. Maybe.
But I definitely think he sees Team Tony's point, but is just like, no, I got it. Right. You know?
Well, and I think I know you and I have talked about this before. For me, there's so much of the Batman canon that I love, but my absolute favorite is the second of the Christopher Nolan movies, The Dark Knight. And it's, I mean, I think there's a lot of it that's great. There's a lot of it that's not so good. The Heath Ledger Joker is just probably second, in my mind, second only to Mark Hamill. Although we discuss Jack Nicholson as well. But to me, what I love about that movie more than anything else are the conversations between Batman, Gordon, and Harvey Dent before he becomes Two-Face, about, you know, how do we deal with criminals, both the sort of quote unquote normal kind and then the, you know, off the deep end kind of Joker, in a world where we can't trust the police, in a world where judges can be killed so easily. And I think that's to me, what I love about Batman is the way he raises those questions about, okay, well, what does it mean to have to break the law in order to fight criminals, you know?
Right. Yeah. I think that kind of backdoors us into a, I'm using that as a poker expression.
To clarify the poker expression, say somebody had 2 clubs on this board, and then another club comes on the river and they made a flush. That would be the backdoor flush. If they had 2 hearts on this board and the heart came, that would be the front door flush. Getting backdoored in poker, losing to a runner-runner flush, is very unpleasant. In real life, I guess, you know, to each their own.
In any other ways that you might be thinking of it. But or like maybe a hacking expression.
Okay.
But to the sort of like Batman and violence and like killing people, where, you know, Punisher kind of exists in a very similar sort of place, right? Where he doesn't trust the government, and I think in many cases rightly so, to be able to do anything about the things that he wants to do stuff about. And so he just goes around killing a ton of people, which obviously Batman doesn't do unless Zack Snyder's writing it. So, you know, and I mean, personally, like, I love Dexter. I really loved Punisher in Daredevil Season 2.
Yeah.
I hadn't been that big a fan of the character previously. I mean, I'm not of the, like, you know, killing is the only solution school of thought. I'm also not really of the, like, killing is fundamentally wrong and you should never do that school of thought. I do, though, really appreciate Batman being a character who's just like, no, that's not how I'm going to do things.
Right.
You know, and that he has his, you know, code, basically, that he just made up himself. He just decided that, you know, because obviously it's not like, oh, I'm just going to follow the law all the time, because, you know, I mean, he's a vigilante, right? And he goes around and does stuff, and there comes a time when Gordon is commissioner, he's just like, yeah, okay, that's how we do things, you know. That's like, not in the Dark Knight trilogy, in, you know, but in, like, the old TV show, right? In the Adam West show, it's just like, yeah, Batman's basically like a cop who,
he's basically been deputized,
right? Exactly. And he, you know, the thing is, he has all those tools instead of guns, basically as a means of non-lethally subduing his adversaries.
Right.
Right, which I mean I think is great, and that's a whole thing that I'd like to see more of that in the real world. Maybe not with shark repellent and whatnot on utility belts, but at the same time, like, we also have to just accept, like, look, Batman exists in a fictional world, in a comic book world, where comic book violence, you can kick someone as hard as you want, and they're just not going to die.
Right. I mean, right? I think that I've talked about that in other settings, but I definitely think that is, with especially with the new Daredevil TV show, with a lot of the Marvel movies, but also with Batman, there is kind of a conceit of, we're imagining that you can hit someone in the head with a metal rod, but it's not lethal.
Right.
I just made quote marks, which none of you are aware of.
Yes, I heard them.
But okay, good. But I think you're right. I think that if we accept that comic book conceit world, it is such an important part of the character that he doesn't want to kill. That he wants to subdue people. He wants to put them in Arkham. Even though we've learned that, I mean, has any criminal ever stayed in Arkham for more than a year? It seems like it's basically got a revolving door.
I think Joker was there for 3 years.
Once, yeah.
But then he clearly escaped.
But to me it raises a really interesting question, because especially when you say Batman versus Punisher, but I think also even some of the people who Batman has seen in his own world, like the Phantasm in the Mask of the Phantasm movie.
Right.
I feel like often, or also Ra's al Ghul, as sometimes is portrayed, one of the things that is often... Thank you. We can argue about the pronunciation of a made-up name. Although actually it is based in Arabic, so probably there is a right pronunciation. But either way, the point being, I think one of the most interesting foils that's often set up to Batman is the person who thinks they are doing the same work as Batman, who is wanting to be an ally of Batman, who is saying, hey, I'm just like you, I'm fighting criminals.
Right.
But where Batman actually says, no, because of that line that I won't cross and you will, that we're not allies.
Right.
And I think that's often one of the ways that's most emphasized of just how important this is to him.
I have to say, without any spoilers for The Batman, the new movie, so many points that we make here, and that Matthew makes particularly, are very relevant, and like, oh, I would have loved to see a Batman movie that did such and such. So, yeah, I don't know. Kind of fun, actually, listening back, sort of listening to like our wish list of what we would like to see in a Batman movie, and then seeing that maybe some of those things were delivered on to some extent or another.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's... that comes up actually in Civil War in the comics, where I mean, again, going back to Punisher and how he's not Batman and which side Batman would be on, like, where he's like, okay, I'm gonna help you, Cap, and Steve's like, okay, and then he just like shoots some bad guys, and they're like, no, you can't stay here.
That's not how we do things.
And and I mean, Batman's definitely, he's like, I mean, I think Batman's a lot more like Captain America than, which is, it's funny because, like, if you put like Superman and Batman next to each other, and you put like Captain America and, maybe Wolverine or something, it's like, Batman and Wolverine both have more of the, and like Batman and Tony Stark have obvious parallels, right?
And Captain America and Superman are the Boy Scouts.
Right. Though, like, on some level, I feel like Batman and Captain America are a little more similar in terms of, like, what they're really willing to do in certain ways. I mean, Superman is like that, too. Right. Although I feel like the sort of the level of power he has, like, I don't know, the end of Man of Steel bothered me because I was like, what's going on, with this? But I do think Superman has this kind of authoritarian nature.
It's very patriarchal. It's very like, I know best and I have the power to enforce what is best, and so on.
And like in the Man of Steel, he's like, I'm just gonna kill people, and that just feels very not Superman to me. So, yeah,
I'm going to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And so in that in the Justice League season 3, I guess there's the whole Cadmus arc, right? And there's in the.
Do you want to take a quick minute and explain what that is for people who haven't seen it?
Sure. Okay. So basically, it's kind of like the whole Marvel Civil War thing where there's a bunch of superheroes going around, the Justice League, who are basically sort of like the Avengers, although they came first, but going around doing good stuff, saving the planet from alien invasions all the time, but in some alternate reality, they, became super authoritarian, kind of like fascist overlords, right? And in that world, I think Superman was kind of the pinnacle of that. Like, we are the rulers who are going to take everyone's freedom so that everybody's safe all the time.
Right.
And so the Cadmus arc is back on like Earth 1 or whatever, the reality, the timeline that the series is following, and the government's basically just like, so yeah, we need a plan in case they turn against us. And there are things in the other series that led up to Justice League that give them even more reason to really think like, yeah, that could happen. And so they basically plot to bring down the Justice League, or to have a counter to it. And Superman's just like, well, I would never do that. And Batman's like, do we know that?
Yeah.
Like he's like, they're right to be afraid of us. And so I think he very much plays that, kind of sees both sides of the argument, that like, look, we can know that we're like good and we're going to do the right thing and blah, 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 blah. But, there's no reason that anyone else should trust us just implicitly, the same way we shouldn't trust the government implicitly to necessarily be able to regulate us properly. It's, ultimately, it's like there's power. People can have it, groups can have it, or, aliens can have it or whatever. And
aliens are a group.
Right. And so having some kind of, well, except for like,
moving on.
Yeah, some aliens are individuals, like Jean Jones is like the last. Anyone can be. Yeah, any group, you can have an individual of a group, and yeah, I don't know. Thus begins a long tradition of me attempting tangents and Matthew cutting them off before. Well, sometimes and sometimes not.
Moving on. But the main point just being that, like, if you have power kind of diffused among different groups, then if one group really gets out of line, another group can step up and be like, okay, hold on, like, let's not do that,
Right. Well, I think it's again one of the other things I love about Batman is his ability to sort of step outside himself and have that not in a but just kind of like to look at his own motivations and to ask him, to be able to say, I think this is right because of my own prejudices and biases, but is it possible that I'm wrong? And he's constantly making other people do the same thing. Like, okay, Superman, you think this is right, but let's step back a second. What are you missing?
Yeah, I mostly agree with that. I kind of think Batman thinks he's always right.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think he recognizes or said, that he might not be in the future, that like mind control exists. And that he shouldn't like have all of the power himself. That, so I mostly agree with you, except like he's pretty cocky.
Yeah. Well, and it's that sort of like, as he's going through the decision-making process, he's open to that. Once he comes to a decision, it's pretty solid.
Right. Exactly.
And I do think it's interesting that, and granted, different versions of this have shown this in different ways, but to me, the person he almost always uses as a little bit of that, to hold him accountable and to sort of help him with his thinking process, and sometimes to point out where he might be stepping a little wrong, is Alfred. He always and part of that is just a narrative technique. Having him explain his thoughts to Alfred works a lot better than an internal monologue. But I also think it gives a little bit of that, Alfred is able to sort of poke him a little bit and say, "Hey, wait a minute, Batman, are you going a little bit too much this way? Or is this happening or that happening?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And that, I mean, Alfred's kind of like his Watson.
Yeah.
And until Robin is his Watson, you know.
Right.
Or Batgirl or Terry in Batman Beyond, where, I mean, I always, when Batman and Robin, well, Batman Forever and then Batman and Robin came out, I was like, oh, I hate Robin. Like, Batman should be alone. You know? But, like, you know, I mean, even then, there was always Alfred. You know, he's never really alone. And then, you know, then there's Lucius Fox as well. Because it's like, where does he get all those toys?
Right.
You know? Like, that was something that I think they were smart about in Batman Begins, just being like, okay, we need people to believe that he could, because I mean, you know, it's like, I did always wonder, like, who built the Batcave?
Right. Well, because and it's funny because as much as they play up that he is this brilliant person, it's always Batman, the world's greatest detective. It's never Batman, the world's greatest inventor. You know.
Right.
And
right,
he does come up with some of the technology is obviously of his own creation. But I think there's always an aspect of which he's smart enough to rely on others for help with some of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, also, it's like you just can't fabricate all of that stuff in. I mean, you need crews.
Yeah.
You know, you need people to put things together, and so I mean, that's where kind of some of the suspension of disbelief. You know, sort of, it's like, well, if there's construction involved in building the Batcave, then some people. You know, there's some, like, union people or non-union who are like,
you know, there's
you
only one episode I've ever seen of any Bat story that covers this, but it does, and it's because of that fact alone, it's one of my favorite.
Where is it?
I believe it's an episode of the animated series, but where you see Batman take the Batmobile to his mechanic. And there's a mechanic who clearly, like, has a good relationship with Batman,
right?
And fixes the Batmobile,
right?
And Penguin figures this out, and I think it's Penguin kidnaps the mechanic and tries to, like, get the mechanic to give that information.
That's
but it's so brilliant, you know, because it's like, yeah, the Batmobile is amazing, but someone's still got to change the oil and check the tires and check the spark plugs.
They're like, hey, I think this thing lost a wheel. That why the Joker got away? I don't know. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
So I loved that little bit. But this is actually a good thing to talk about because it certainly has come up in The Killing Joke, one of the things we both saw most recently, but also I think comes up in a lot of other stuff is Batman's relationships with other people.
What relationships?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and here we should distinguish a little bit between, you know. There's a comment I made to you a while ago that I actually got from some wonderful people on the DC On Screen podcast, which I would also highly recommend. But one of the guys on that podcast says that, like, Tony Stark wears the Iron Man suit. Batman wears the Bruce Wayne suit. You know, that Batman is Bruce Wayne is not the core identity and he becomes Batman. Batman is the core identity and he becomes Bruce Wayne. So I can even put aside, like, you know, Bruce Wayne is a womanizer and does all these things to keep up the act, and you can morally question it if you want, and I would, but that's another story. But just looking at Batman and his relationship with other people, other than Alfred, is it fair to say he's kind of a dick?
I mean, even with Alfred, he's a dick, right? I mean, there's tons of, as a kid on Gotham, as, you know, an adult with, like, I mean, in the Dark Knight Rises, I guess, you know, he's kind of a dick to Alfred, and I think in Batman Begins, isn't there? They have some, you know, they fight, they argue.
Yeah.
And it depends on the continuity, basically. Sometimes Alfred is like, I'm just the butler, whatever you say, sir, you know.
Yep.
But Alfred at the very least is sort of I would say he's kind of like a mother figure.
Yeah.
To Bruce, and to, you know, where, like, his money is kind of like the stereotypical father figure.
Pretty much.
You know, not to say that those are what gender roles should be, but, like, when Batman was created, like, that's kind of how most people, I think, saw things. And I think so. There's a certain sort of deference that he has to Alfred that, Alfred has that like servant deference to Master Bruce, but like, but at the same time, it's like Alfred's older, and he's known Bruce since he was a kid.
Yeah.
Whereas pretty much all of the other relationships that like Batman, all of the other relationships that Batman has with anybody really began after he was Batman.
Right.
And like once he becomes Batman, he pretty much just thinks he knows everything. All of the other people he works with tend to be, sidekicks.
Yeah.
Obviously, depending on the continuity, there's tons of other things, and in the Justice League, then there are more colleagues.
Really, like they're not partners; they're sidekicks.
I do think it's interesting that the only two I can think of that are established in some, not all continuities, but at least in some continuities, as having been friends with Bruce Wayne, is Harvey Dent, who becomes Two-Face, and his cop friend from the newest season, who I can't remember the name of, but who becomes Clayface.
His cop friend?
Yeah, isn't the guy who becomes Clayface a cop?
I'm maybe somewhere, but generally he's an actor.
Yeah, no. Oh, that's right. Because you haven't seen the Batman.
No, I haven't seen all of the Batman.
Okay, I'm gonna look it up now. But yeah, I'm pretty sure he's a cop. But either way, it's the implication is that they
Spoiler alert. No.
They went to high school together. They actually played basketball together.
Yeah.
They were good friends, and then he turns into Clayface. But other than those two, there's never any mention of Bruce Wayne's friends.
No, there's Hush, who's actually another rich kid that Bruce Wayne grew up with, and some horrible stuff happens, and he becomes a supervillain.
Ethan Bennett, who is a Gotham City police detective in the Batman.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's a different. I'm pretty sure that's a very different Clayface origin story. But
to clarify, we are talking about The Batman, the animated series, which is similar but not the same as The Batman, the movie. Like, fairly different, but in a lot of ways similar. I wonder if it was deliberately, like, based on the same source material. It's like Batman Year 2.
Right. But yeah, so there's very few, characters that are like, they had the Rachel Dawes character, basically, in, where Harvey Dent wasn't friends with Bruce Wayne, really. Yeah. Like, they knew each other, right? But the whole Rachel character in The Dark Knight and Batman Begins, which I'm not really a big fan of.
Yeah, I think that's a whole other thing we can get into, but just of all the things I love about the Christopher Nolan movies, the role that romance plays in Batman's life in those movies seems in part because I kind of think of Batman as like the warrior monk,
Yeah.
He's kind of and I guess that's sort of what I was going at with the original question is I sort of feel like on some level, he's skipped every other superhero. You see all of this, oh, I love her, but I can't love her because I'm a superhero. Batman is just like, nope, not going to love anybody. I'm a hero. This is what I got to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And I sort of feel like that there are great stories told about Batgirl and Robin and all the rest of them, but one of the counters to those stories is that those relationships are never terribly fulfilling for the other person, because Batman on some level is always treating them like a sidekick.
Yeah, it's always all about work, and he's always the one in charge.
Yeah.
And that's why Dick Grayson leaves and becomes Nightwing, is like, you know what, I'm going to do my own thing. Like, we can, and in some continuities, like, they're still friends and they cooperate, and in other continuities, he's like, oh, Bruce Wayne. Just
well, and I wonder, here's something I never actually thought of, but just as we're talking about it, it occurs to me. We talked before about how Batman doesn't like the idea of trusting someone else's authority just because you're supposed to.
Right.
We're not going to trust the government just because they're the government. We're not going to trust Superman just because he's Superman. But the flip side of it, he is sort of asking, the rest of the Bat team to trust him just because he's Batman.
Right.
And I'm wondering, and I've not read any of the Nightwing stories or seen the show, so I don't know. But do you think is there some level of him being, annoyed at Dick Grayson for leaving, but also having kind of a grudging admiration because it seems like Dick is doing exactly what Batman would have told him to do, which is saying, don't trust someone's authority just because they're Batman.
I don't think Batman wants them to trust him because he's Batman. I think he wants them to trust him because he's right, which is sort of very relatable to me. Basically, like, I don't know. I think the idea of authority is kind of inherently flawed, right? The idea that a person should have some level of authority vested in them from whatever besides the people who choose to like follow them basically and think, okay, I think this person's right. And so I think Batman is asking people to trust his intellect and judgment rather than because I'm Batman, you know? Anyway.
Am I projecting here?
Yes. I mean, I've never had that thought and I've never really seen it.
Okay.
You know, I do think that I don't know. I mean, there's so many different continuities. There's a Young Justice series which has Batman and Robin's a kid, and then there's a different Robin in the second season, and the younger and Dick is Nightwing now, and it's kind of interesting, and and they're all there, and they get along. But then there's other continuities where, like, Nightwing, where, like, Bruce and Dick haven't seen each other for decades,
Oh, interesting.
And, I mean, if you watch the, Batman Beyond, I think Batman Beyond was actually the first show that made me think Robin was, like, a good idea. Since watching the Adam West Burwart, Batman, the Batman show, then where it's like that's just a totally different paradigm,
right?
But in terms of like serious Batman Beyond's the first time that I was like, this works, and part of it's because in Batman Beyond, Bruce Wayne is like somewhere between 80 and 100,
right?
I think it's unclear just how old he is, but yeah, I mean, he just literally can no longer be Batman, anymore from a physical standpoint. So having someone else do all that physical stuff suddenly, now it's like it makes sense in a way that it didn't exactly the same way before. But so the relationship between Bruce and Terry, old Batman and new Batman, basically, it's different than it ever is between Batman and Robin, because Terry isn't Robin, he's Batman,
right.
And so there's a sense there that it's a different thing than when he was like training all these Robins, but it sheds light on kind of the mentor relationship and sort of who is Bruce Wayne outside of, or who is Batman outside of the the Batsuit, basically, and so I think that's really interesting there, and then it also kind of it sort of just illuminates all those other relationships earlier where, I mean, in some of the comics, Dick Grayson is Batman. He actually does wear the Batsuit, and in other continuities that maybe never happens, but that, Bruce Wayne, sometimes he disappears or something happens or he's injured.
Right. Someone's got to take over for him.
Yeah, there's one thing somewhere where Superman wears the Batsuit. Just Batman's missing. It's hilarious.
I would love to read that.
Yeah, well, it's actually it's an animated thing,
and I think that's
you'll eventually see.
One of the things that I love about the Batman, which just to be clear, that's the specific name of a show. Yeah. It's a little confusing because if you just say the Batman, people don't realize you're talking about one specific medium.
Right.
And that was
but one of the things I like about it is, by the later seasons, both Batgirl and Robin are part of his team.
Right.
And they come to him for very different reasons. Batgirl, as the daughter of Gordon, and she's this gymnast student, so she's got all this talent already. And she sort of has her origin story that makes her want to be a part of his team, and she comes and petitions him for it.
Right.
Whereas with Robin, we get the, I think, pretty traditional, Dick Grayson story of, he has an experience very similar to Bruce Wayne's. His parents are killed by criminals when he's quite young, and he has a lot of the same feelings that Bruce did at that time, and that probably has highlighted some others, but I think the Batman does one of the best jobs I've seen of really emphasizing how much Batman doesn't decide, I want a sidekick, this guy Dick might sort of work. He sees Dick like really wrestling with what he wrestled with, realizes that becoming Batman was what pulled him out of that, and sort of wants to offer Dick Grayson the chance to be Robin for the same reason. And I really like that emphasis, because it's a lot of Batman being like, he's already spent a season telling Batgirl, I don't want a sidekick, you're just getting in the way. And now he's feeling the same thing about having two potential sidekicks.
Right.
But he also thinks that this is really good for Dick Grayson.
Right.
And it winds up being a really interesting tension between the three of them of how these two different people became sidekicks for very different reasons.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's very kind of almost the opposite of, I think it's in Young Justice, where they show Robin's backstory and sort of how he became Robin and why he became Robin, and I think that's in a continuity where like Batman never knows or catches who killed his parents.
Yep.
Which I prefer.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about on Gotham, like how much there's going to be with that, and I know in Batman Begins they had like Joe Chill, I think. They and then something very definitive happens, and I kind of like the idea that like one of the reasons Bruce is the way he is that's just this open, it's like it's an open wound,
Yes.
and wearing the bat suit is almost like the thing he does to like bandage it every day.
Yeah.
And it's not this just closed, okay, well, I've dealt with that chapter in my life and now I'm moving on. It's like he's always that 8-year-old boy whose parents just got shot. He's
Oh yeah.
And so, while he can sometimes have a sense of humor, he's just very consistently like he's in like perma-brood,
Well, and I think that also what you said. Oh, go ahead.
Well, just that in that series they show Dick Grayson and how his parents were killed, and how I think Batman and him like basically caught them quickly, and then that was like dealt with and that was resolved. And so Robin, kind of, while he had the similar kind of tragedy in his backstory,
he gets the catharsis that Batman never does.
Yeah, and the closure and he's like making jokes all the time.
Yeah.
He's this very like kind of almost like a little Peter Parker-ish, but like maybe a little cooler. And
no offense intended to any Peter Parker fans, of which I think Peter Parker's great and is portrayed very differently by different actors and written differently in different comics. But overall, definitely different from Dick Grayson, but equally or even more. Okay, I don't know what I'm saying. I like both characters. Cool, let's go.
And so that difference between like Dick and Bruce, I think I like a lot.
Yeah. No, I can see that. Well, and that gets me into actually something I wanted to ask, going way back to a topic we talked about near the beginning, which is I'm like you. I don't want Batman to know who killed his parents. Because to me, I think part of what it emphasizes is, and I think this is part of what sets him apart from those other vigilantes who cross the lines he won't cross, is that for him, this isn't about vengeance.
Right.
It's not, Punisher, especially in Daredevil season 2, but also in other things, people killed his family, and now the Punisher wants to hurt the people who killed his family and everybody like them, And it's he wants to sort of prevent other people from being hurt the way he was, but there's a strong aspect of a personal vendetta.
Yeah, he's all like, "Hello, my name is Frank Castle.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
killed my daughter. Prepare to die."
Yeah, exactly. He's an Inigo Montoya.
Exactly.
Whereas
with guns.
Yeah, which is funny because when you started going to the accent, I thought you were going to say he's Desperado, which is another story
that too. I mean, yeah, right.
Of a vigilante who's
right after seeing Punisher season 1, Daredevil season 2, I was like, oh, this is Desperado.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the other one specific in the Batman universe though is the Phantasm.
Right.
You know, she is trying to be a Batman-like character, but her specific focus is to kill the people who hurt her father, and her family. And I think that's such an interesting way of seeing Batman. Is, you know, for him, would you agree that for him it's not about vengeance? It's not about
totally.
It's that open wound, but it's not about I'm so angry I want to get the people who got my parents.
Yeah, I mean that's his emotional motivation, but his real motivation is just he sees the world, he doesn't like the way it is, he wants to change it.
Yeah.
And so he works to change it, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of saying it. And he saw just how bad the world can be when his parents died.
Yeah.
But it's not the vengeance. It's the I don't want to live in a world where good people like the Waynes can be shot outside of an opera.
Yeah, and I would actually just remove the word good.
Yeah, no, that's true too.
And because I mean because he doesn't want to kill bad people either, you know. Because those people have kids, you know. Yeah. It's like or people who know them or whatever. He just doesn't want to live in a world where people are getting killed all the time. So he goes around and he tries to stop people from killing other people, but he doesn't do it by killing those people.
I mean, two of my favorite episodes from the animated series are one where what's the Croc's name? He's just Killer Croc. Thank you. Yeah. Where he gets mixed up in like the home for lost circus performers.
Right.
Do you remember this episode?
No.
Okay. Well, it's really adorable, and like there's he basically hangs out with this home for I don't know a better word, but it's the word that gets used pejoratively against them, but circus freaks. And they all kind of take in
Killer Croc does?
Yeah, and they all sort of welcome Killer Croc as one of them.
Right. Right. Does he eat them?
No, he winds up stealing that from them somewhat. But obviously he's having some kind of like moral dilemma about it, as much as he can in what is not the world's greatest intellect in the Bat Rogue Gallery. But when Batman catches him, Batman is clearly sympathetic to that.
Yeah.
And similarly, there's an episode where I think it's one of the episodes where Harley Quinn breaks away from Joker and kind of recognizes that she's in this abusive relationship with Joker, goes off on her own, and with Poison Ivy commits some crimes. And I forget the exact detail, but Batman, like as he's taking her into jail, he's clearly sympathetic to what she's gone through. And I think there's something like she stole a dress and he winds up buying her that dress or something. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay.
But I know the sort of thing you're talking about.
I think I have seen that episode more recently, and it is fantastic.
Yeah, and it's not just those two things. It happens in other places. But it's to me a wonderful message where Batman is sort of saying, okay, people like Harley Quinn, like Killer Croc, like the Joker, who we'll definitely talk about in a minute, are dangerous, and I need to protect other people from them. But they're not evil in a way that like I should feel great about myself just for hurting them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think on a fundamental level, I think Batman believes in restorative justice.
Yeah.
You know, rather than retributive justice. And he just... I'm not sure whether the writers, like, really lean into that so hard.
Uh-huh.
You know, or whether he'd necessarily put it that way. But, like, I just think it's definitely true, you know?
Oh, definitely.
He's not like you have to pay for doing this bad thing that's hurt someone.
Yeah.
He's like, I have to stop you from doing these bad things that are hurting people, and then I want to try to help you get to a point where you're not trying to do that anymore.
And I think, to me, I think that's pretty revolutionary when you think about it, because there is so much in our media that sort of likes to emphasize the idea of it's great to watch our heroes beat up bad guys.
Right, yeah.
And to me, I think, let's get into the Not My Batman, you know?
Right.
when you think about the things that don't match what you think Batman should be, I'm guessing this is the same for you, but for me, near the top of the list is when I see Batman relishing hurting bad guys.
Yeah, totally. It's that's very hashtag not my Batman.
Uh-huh.
You know, I mean, and it's okay. So Daredevil and Batman, I think there's a lot of kind of common ground there.
Yep.
You know, in a lot of ways. But the Daredevil sort of like, you know, let the devil out kind of thing, where
Yep.
he's like beating people with his hands, and he's like really into it. You know, it's like he kind of loses himself in it.
To
and
me, one of my favorite scenes is when he's talking to the priest, and he says that and he recognizes this isn't good, but he says, what I'm afraid of is that I enjoy hurting them, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think he does. Like, he doesn't want to. He feels guilt about enjoying it because, you know, he's Catholic. but he, you know, he definitely has that sort of love-hate relationship with beating up bad guys, you know, that, you know, and it's not that I don't think Batman never is anywhere near that abyss, sort of, but he's seen it, you know, and not blinked and been like, all right, well, that's not me. That's not who I want to be. And then that's not who he is, because he's got, you know, pretty ridiculous self-control.
I mean, there's so many ways in which, you know, I've talked at length, and I will probably hopefully do another discussion about just the TV show Gotham. And there's some things I think it gets very right about Batman, some not, and some where I can say, well, this is young Bruce Wayne, he hasn't become Batman yet.
Yeah.
But to me, the scene where, and spoiler warning, but the scene where he gets the chance to shoot the person who killed his parents,
right,
in cold blood, you know, it wouldn't be self-defense, it would just be he's sitting there harmless, giving Bruce the chance to shoot him, and Bruce doesn't. Yeah,
and that, to me, is like, as much as anything, that's the moment he becomes Batman, you know?
Very much so.
When he's just like, that's not what I want to do in this world, you know?
Yeah. Well, so let's use this as a jumping off point. What else are you seeing out there that to you is not your Batman?
Before we get into that, I would like to apologize for constantly switching the tables, but they seem to be breaking or getting bad or whatever. I'll try and play these two for the remainder of the session. And now we'll talk about Not My Batman.
Zack Snyder might have made a movie.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole question of who's worse, Snyder or Schumacher?
Oh, that's a good question. You know,
for any who don't know, Zack Snyder is the guy who directed the most recent Batman vs Superman, as well as Man of Steel, and Joel Schumacher did the second two of the. It's not a trilogy. What's a 4-part? A quadrilogy? But the four.
He did the third and fourth Batman movies in the original, you know, 4 movies of Batman, basically. Right. The 2 that came before the Batman Begins and the other Dark Knight.
Batman Forever and Batman and Robin.
Yeah.
So who got Batman worse, Snyder or Schumacher? I'm
actually going to go with Schumacher, even though I dislike Snyder's Batman more.
Uh-huh.
And here's why. In the 1990s... Okay, I'm going to actually just more broadly say that I think what Schumacher did was worse.
Uh-huh.
Because in the 1990s, like, the only real Batman popular fiction stuff was the Batman. I mean, there was the Batman the Animated Series. That's true. Good point, Self. But but they were kind of like, they were way at the forefront, right? Of like, and it kind of felt like they were presenting, this is who Batman is, you know? Whereas, and also, I mean, like, what other comic book stuff was there? There was Blade, you know?
Right.
But
came out like a year later, I think, than Batman and Robin.
There was very little comic book stuff, and it kind of killed comic book stuff for like a little while.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
you know?
I feel like the X-Men and Spider-Man movies kind of rebirthed them, But that was only that was in the 2000s. That
Yeah. That
Schumacher,
was the next millennium.
Yeah, Schumacher killed the comic book movie.
It was like only a few years though before X-Men, I think. So oh wait, or was Batman and Robin 95? I don't know, whatever. Anyway, the point being that it was tragic, but I think sometimes there's a little bit of an overemphasis where with hindsight we can look back and be like, yeah, maybe it wasn't as big a deal as it felt like at the time. But it felt like the end of the comic book movie world for a bit, for sure.
Yeah, so that, I feel like that's a bigger offense in some ways, even though that version of Batman was really he really just wanted to go back to the Adam West Batman.
Right.
And I actually found like a kind of new sympathy for that recently, where like finding out that Schumacher was, I think, one of the few openly gay Hollywood executives at the time, and that the Adam West Batman show was this kind of like there was this kind of like gay like pride thing in it.
Oh yeah, I mean it's incredibly campy.
Right?
It's incredible. Yeah, the homoeroticism between Batman and Robin.
Batman and Robin, which is highly problematic. Although it's like, I guess Burt Ward was an adult.
Right.
He was 20-something when that show was made, and Chris O'Donnell,
Chris O'Donnell, yeah.
Chris O'Donnell was, he was an adult. He wasn't like a young teen. And like,
right.
Then we can get into, off the rails into like ancient Greek, like whatever, and you can argue philosophy and ethics and ad nauseum there. And that's, that's a rabbit hole that's maybe for another day. But the point being that putting them in this context, after also looking for Nightwing shirts and seeing that there are a whole bunch of I Heart Dick shirts for Nightwing, which I was like, wow. Yeah, okay.
But no, I think you're right. I think that there's definitely, like, to me, Schumacher's Batman is not my Batman.
Right.
But it's not. It's a campy Batman. I mean, like,
exactly.
To me, what's wrong with a Schumacher? It's not. Schumacher's movies are not my Batman. That's not my Mr. Freeze. I mean, that's the big.
Yeah, there's that. I mean, there's something to be said for the fact that Batman and Robin is just a truly terrible movie.
Yes.
In a way that I think Batman vs Superman is not a truly terrible movie.
Yeah.
It's funny how much my opinions on this have evolved, and I haven't rewatched the movies really, so maybe I have to go back and watch them again at some point. I mean, I don't have to, but I'm a little curious to see and be like, is this still what I think? But also, if you want to hear Matthew and I, as well as Ashley Coffin, this is a spot, I don't know, full pod, I'll just hold. Talk about the Schumacher Batman movies, as well as some other Batman movies, you can go back and look at podcasts that are after this one we're listening to, but not also currently recent, like from a couple months ago, in the podcast archives. It's like Schumacher Bats, or like Joel does Bats or something. I don't know. Matthew has the titles, but okay, let's go.
Yeah.
I think it's mediocre. I think, it's visually okay in some ways, and kind of cool in some ways. And
I feel like go ahead.
Oh, just like it's well executed. Batman vs. Robin was just like, what are you doing?
Right.
And Batman vs. Superman is just like, that's not the movie I want to see with Batman in it.
And I feel like that's kind of going to your point, like, I never took the Adam West Batman that seriously as Batman,
right.
Because to me it's camp. It's almost, to me, that's a TV show made to be a satire of the comic book genre, and it's at times a pretty funny one. And once George Clooney puts on a Batman suit that has nipples, this tells me this is not the dark, brooding detective wrestling with the death of his parents. This is a guy with a superhero suit with nipples. So let's just laugh along and enjoy it.
And if it were funny, like, and this takes us to like where we are now, which is why I don't think Batman vs Superman was as bad as those other Batman movies. Is like, I mean, I hated it.
Right.
You know,
Okay,
I watched it and I was like, why?
Yeah.
You know, but at the same time, while I hated it, I was also like, well, The Killing Joke is coming out a couple months later.
Right.
You know, there's Batman in a Suicide Squad movie later this year. There's a Batman solo film coming out in a couple years.
And and don't forget the most important.
Well, and the Batman Lego movie.
Exactly.
Which is basically the Joel Schumacher movies, except really funny.
Yeah.
It looks like, you know, and
funny.
in a context where there are other Batmans who are more like Batmans that I like. You know, I mean, you
Right.
have Gotham, you have tons of animated things coming out regularly, and there's also more access to all of these things. So the Schumacher movies to me were like, no, this is Batman and this is, you know, deal with it, you know? Whereas now I'm like, the Zack Snyder movie, I get to watch and be like, not my Batman. I'll go watch some other Batman stuff because there's just so much of it.
Right.
So that's why I just feel like it wasn't as bad a thing, even though it was terrible. Not as a movie, but as a Batman.
No, and I get that. I think that's, to me, and I want to hear you say more about why Snyder was not your Batman. But to me, the one thing I want to add to that is I think, for me, once I see somewhat the Val Kilmer Batman, but especially the George Clooney Batman, once I see just how ridiculously campy it is, I'm no longer even of course it's not my Batman, you know?
Right.
And I'm not expecting it to.
Yeah,
I'm expecting it to be a satire of Batman, and hopefully a good one. It just didn't happen to be a good one.
Right.
But clearly Zack Snyder was trying again with Batfleck to be the defining picture of what Batman is.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing is, he asked us to hold it to a much higher standard than Schumacher did. And I think it just didn't meet that standard. I know you feel the same. So let's get into that. And this will be this, and then I want to talk about Joker, and then we'll wrap up. But, so, to you, why is Snyder's Batman not your Batman?
I mean, because he's just going around killing people. Like, whatever,
Right.
I'm killing people, you know. And there's a way that he could have made that work. You know, I mean, that's not where I want to see Batman, really.
Uh-huh.
And I was actually going to make a Jason Bourne reference earlier, and the Jason Bourne movie actually has a lot of parallels to the new one, Jason Bourne, has a lot of parallels to the Zack Snyder Batman.
You will hear me make many references to Jason Bourne throughout the upcoming podcasts as we go on. I love the Bourne series, except for the last movie, which I just can't. Just can't.
But, you know, it's implied, or, you know, we know that Joker has killed a Robin, right? Before Batman vs Superman happened. But he doesn't show us. Instead, he shows us, you know, Bruce Wayne's origin story for the 1000th time.
Right.
Like, we don't need to see that. When I saw that in the preview, that was when I first got really concerned.
Yeah.
Because, like, first when I heard that Ben Affleck was cast as Batman, I was like, oh, what? Like,
Which,
what?
I have to say, I think Ben Affleck was actually a very good Batman. It was just a terrible written part for him.
Yeah, I think he was totally fine. I mean, not my first choice. You know, I'd still go with Karl Urban or Idris Elba over.
I love Idris Elba as Batman. That'd be amazing.
Just so good, and he would be really good as Bruce Wayne too.
Yes.
You know, and you know, and I just so when I finally got over the casting decision, I was like, you know what? Ben Affleck is actually really good as a supporting actor. He's definitely been moving more towards serious stuff lately.
Yep.
You know, and physically he can certainly be a Batman, you know, and a Bruce Wayne. So I definitely was like, okay, fine. You know, that I could even see how it could really be good, right? And then the preview came out and they had the scene of you know, the Waynes being murdered again, and I was like, this is not a Batman origin story. This is Batman vs Superman. You're trying to tell the story of this older Batman. Like, we all know where he came from.
Yeah.
Like, this is like, it's like feeling like if you had a story like where Jesus is a minor character, it would be like feeling like you needed to flash back to like the crucifixion,
right.
like just so everybody understood like Jesus's origin story.
Well,
you know.
that's the end of his story, not the origin. But yes, no, I
Well,
get,
zombie Jesus.
yeah, okay, I get what you mean. Oh boy.
What? Wasn't there something about raising from the dead? I don't know. Whatever. I didn't read the whole book, but
the host and the guest do not always agree on everything, such as religious perspectives. But we're gonna move on now.
Anyway, the point is.
But no, I think you're exactly like, to me.
Only one of us has religious perspectives. The other has some limited perspective on religion. I'm the one with the limited perspective.
Spider-Man in the new Civil War movie.
Yeah.
We didn't see a radioactive spider bite him because we don't need to.
Exactly.
And apparently we're not going to in this new movie.
Yeah, and that's just a good creative choice. You know, understanding that you've had 2 origin movies in the past, 15 years. Like, you don't need to show the origin again. Yeah. We get it. And if people don't know, they'll be fine, and they'll look it up if they really want to, you know?
And to me...
Did I go watch the old Spider-Man movies? I didn't rewatch them before No Way Home, but, like, I don't know. I kind of feel like at least the first one. Let me know in the comments if you think I should rewatch first Spider-Man movie.
I think you're right. I hated that scene. The pearls was a nice cinematic touch, but the whole scene was totally unnecessary.
Slow motion. So much slow motion.
I know, it was done, and so many flashbacks to it. So unnecessary. But to me, and I think that you're right, the violence is ridiculous. Though even if you go back and look, like, when Michael Keaton blows up Joker's warehouse,
right,
we never quite see him shoot any of Joker's minions,
right,
but he certainly shoots a machine gun into a building full of a lot of people.
Yeah.
But even putting that aside, like, but yeah, right, I hated the killing. I hated the whole thing of branding criminals.
Oh, yeah.
Because that goes so against...
Like, what?
That goes so against everything we were talking about before about the restorative justice.
Yeah.
But to me, here's the biggest problem. The world's greatest detective gets outthought and manipulated by 20-year-old Lex Luthor.
Yeah,
that's
was
not my Batman.
That was the deal breaker for me, was that this Batman was just a sucker.
Yeah.
And it's not like a young Batman who's going to develop into the world's greatest detective. That's a story I might have some interest in. However, this was an aged Batman who had wisdom from experience in theory, but not because they decided not to write that into the story.
And the Batman I know, the Batman that I love from the Justice League series, like at its kind of, that's almost like the height of Batman to me.
Yeah.
Where like basically all the rest of the Justice League is like, well, shucks, I guess we should go, turn ourselves in and just see what happens. Yeah. And he's like, no. He's like, I know what's going on. I'm going to fix it. Batman out.
Yeah.
And like, it's just, I don't see Lex Luthor pulling one over on Batman like this,
Right.
Like, why wasn't he analyzing the handwriting of the, of the letters he was getting? Why wasn't he, researching doing all the Sherlock stuff, basically, that he's supposed to be able to do? It was just like, no, I'm going to track kryptonite from the other side of the globe because I must kill Superman, And
it takes the thing that we love about Batman, that he is suspicious of Superman. Like, you said how you hated the end of Man of Steel. So did Batman.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And it takes that story of him being suspicious of Superman, which I think is such a good and important story, and makes it all a dupe. And to me,
exactly.
This was, as I see it, like the biggest difference between, on some level, Batman vs Superman and the Civil War. It's the same conflict. It's the how much do we trust people with their super abilities?
Yeah.
And I feel like in Civil War, you can come out either Team Tony or Team Cap, but there's and I know you and I are on different sides.
Can.
But that's the thing is that, but there's at least the argument is made that there are legitimate reasons to be worried about the Avengers not being restricted, and it's perfectly fine to say you don't agree with those, but at least there's reasons given. There's something to start the fight.
Yeah.
Whereas in Batman vs Superman, it's all stupid. It's so clear that no good person should ever doubt Superman. It's just because Lex Luthor is manipulating them, and who falls for it more than anyone? Batman.
Right. I mean, I don't fully agree. I agree kind of in spirit with your argument.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen a number of people who actually are like, yes, Batman was totally right. And I'm like, what?
Oh.
But, you know. But then again, I feel that about Team Tony in Civil War, where
Right.
like there kind of is a little bit of deceit going on, you know.
Yep.
And the government agency is all like, we know some really suspect things about them. And like, I feel like maybe Tony should have done that research. The thing though in Civil War that works so well is that all the characters' motivations make total sense for those characters.
Right.
And in Batman Superman, that's really not established. And just one thing that I was gonna say with reference to the Wayne murders, like, they could have shown Robin getting killed.
Yeah.
And I feel like that would have carried much more emotional weight and sort of justified this notion of who Batman is now when Batman vs Superman starts.
Right.
You know, like, instead it's like, here's this thing that happened 33 years ago and made Batman become Batman, but they didn't show like how Batman became this darker, messed up version of Batman who, like, I can believe that character might eventually exist.
Right.
Like, you could create a scenario where that was feasible, but you have to show the backstory has to be pertinent to that, not just to like, oh, and by the way, in case you've never heard of Batman before, here's his origin story.
Yeah,
you know?
and to me that could be like, I hadn't thought of this till now, but you know, all the stuff that he does where he's killing people, where he's, you know, branding them when they go to jail. If the idea is that because of the death of Robin, because of being grizzled and worn out after doing this for 20 years, he has sort of lost some of those ideals, and that one of the stories we're going to tell is how his partnership with Wonder Woman and to some extent Superman helps him reclaim that. Like,
Right.
Okay, that to me is, it is my Batman because you've taken my Batman on a journey and you're going to take him back. And I don't think that's my favorite story, but I'd be interested in hearing that story. But that's not the story Zack Snyder's telling.
Right, exactly. There was a good story to maybe be told in there. It's not the one that was told. And maybe if you have the Joker being Joker, then you don't have Lex being the Joker.
Yeah.
Like, what was that about?
That
you know?
was so just like it.
Like,
I don't like Jesse Eisenberg as an actor for the most part.
But, I do.
But I just his Lex was so not anything I associate with Lex Luthor.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm all for trying things, but like, I don't think it worked.
Yeah.
And but that also just comes down to the writing, you know.
Right.
I mean, yeah, there was the gesticulation, the way he was kind of like crazy, like Joker, but just the way it was written, it was like, Lex is like, he's like above a certain, you know, like.
Well, 'cause I feel like on some level he wasn't even trying to be the Joker; he was trying to be Heath Ledger.
Oh.
He was trying to be that sort of specifically madcap, off the wall. I'm showing how ridiculous everything is.
Yeah,
kind
maybe.
of idea.
Yeah, I mean, it was just bad.
For more insightful commentary, like, it was just bad. Tune in next time to Poker and Podcasts for episode 2 for Who Is My Batman Part 2 from Superhero Ethics episode 2. And I think that is that. You can hit subscribe. If you want to check out the podcast, there's the link in the description below and over there, right? TheEthicalPanda.com for it in its native habitat. And hit like, and see you next time. Cheers.